Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet of ours. Welcome to Sustainability in Your Ear. This is the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable, carbon neutral society, and I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thanks for joining the conversation today. As the climate crisis intensifies, carbon offsets are often sold as a solution, but critics argue that they're more of a smokescreen than a fix. And one of the most vocal among them is Cool Earth, an international NGO working directly with Indigenous communities to protect rainforests. Their message is clear. It's too late for offsetting. The focus must shift to real emissions cuts and investing in the people best equipped to defend nature. And those are the Indigenous communities that live in the rainforest. Joining us today is Hannah Peck, Deputy Director and Policy Lead at Cool Earth. She has a PhD in ecology and zoology and years of experience working alongside rainforest communities. Hannah has helped shape Cool Earth's alternative model for climate action, one that rejects extractive carbon markets and centers on Indigenous leadership. The organization makes cash payments to Indigenous communities living in rainforests to help them purchase essentials and make investments in resilience. It's a clear alternative to cutting down the rainforest to survive economically. We'll unpack why offsets are failing, the risks of relying on tree planting schemes, and what real community led solutions look like. You can learn more about Cool Earth at coolearth.org. Cool Earth is all one word, no space, no dash, coolearth.org. We'll get into the conversation right after a quick commercial break. Welcome to the show, Hannah. How are you doing today?
Really good, thank you. It's great to be on the show.
Well, thank you for joining me. I just got back from Circularity 2025. It's a conference, and one of the things everybody was talking about was carbon offsets. And Cool Earth argues that carbon offsets are an excuse for continuing to emit CO2. What do you see as the main failures in current carbon offset markets that we need to be aware of and address?
So carbon offsets, they're not just a distraction from reducing fossil fuel use. They are actively creating further damage by creating a feeling that people are off the hook from the damage they've created by their CO2 emissions, and limiting global warming to 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels and preventing that catastrophic climate impact is not achievable while carbon offsetting is used as a means to continue using fossil fuels.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's three main failures we see. The first is the design, regulation, and governance of carbon offset schemes are not fit for purpose and they're open for abuse. And this is despite the attempts more recently to try and regulate them. So they've got better, but I mean, rigorous research, I think it was shown in the journal Nature last year, shows that less than 16% of carbon credits issued constitute real emission reduction. And part of that issue is that by monetizing carbon and going through offset providers, which are effectively middlemen, it creates an incentive to trade and make profit from the offsets, which end up inflating the prices, and we end up with overcrediting.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's, on top of that, there's issues of the monitoring and regulations. You can end up with double counting, so products being sold more than once. And it's also really difficult to accurately measure carbon saved and secured in offset projects. And then the second one is that there's a fundamental flaw in nature in using nature-based offset projects. They don't have the permanence of carbon storage.
Mm-hmm.
There's no guarantee that that carbon will remain stored, for example, forest fires, landslides, flooding, political changes. But when we burn fossil fuels, the emissions are in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. So you really need to have that permanence to be able to use it as an offset. So I think that's a really key problem. And then the worst of the lot from the charities perspective is due to the poor regulation and governance of many offset projects. They prove to be unjust and unethical, and so damaging to Indigenous people and local communities. So there's often a lack of free prior informed consent. damages caused to sustainable livelihoods, and money just not reaching the people whose land it is. And then there's actual cases of abuse where people have been pushed off their land or beaten. So yeah, those are the main flaws I can see in them.
Well, so small issues. I'm sure we can solve all these problems in the next 25,
Yeah,
30
it's a
minutes.
little depressing. Yeah.
Well, we've had folks on the show before who dealt with Indigenous communities and particularly provided health care. The result was they didn't go cut down trees to pay for hospital bills. Talk about the Cool Earth approach. You give cash payments to communities. How does that work? How do you choose them? What do they do with them?
Yeah, so Cool Earth's approach is about keeping the rainforest we have left standing.
Mhm.
And we've seen that, well, we know that forests are responsible for 23% of climate mitigation needed to prevent further global warming, and protecting rainforests is just vital for the health of the planet. And we support Indigenous people and local communities who've been sustainably living on that land and protecting it for generations, so they can keep on doing that. And we really believe it's the most effective way of keeping rainforests protected and keeping the carbon protected. And we know that the frontline communities have already been protecting 54% of the remaining intact forest, but they've received so little funds to be able to continue to do that. So they're experiencing a huge amount of marginalization, and the colonization has created a lot of that, and a lack of access to healthcare and to the resources they need. And so simply providing cash to those people is a way that they can then manage their land as they need, as they've done for generations, and to be able to keep living there.
When you make a cash payment to a community, how big a difference does that make on a practical level to them? Does it allow them to plan for a year or two ahead? I mean, has it changed their perspective on the decisions they're making about the relationship with the rainforest?
It's really different with different communities. We work in Peru and Papua New Guinea, and we've done some work in the Congo as well. So it's different depending on the different context. But generally, it's just used to be spent on whatever the pressures are of the day, just like we would spend money on what we need. So on healthcare, education, helping with the sustainable agriculture. And we've had some results come out recently that have shown, yeah, it's been spent on those different things, but it's also freed up people's time to be able to work on the other things that are important to them. So maybe being involved in conservation, locally political activity, and being able to invest more in local economies. So it's a really wide range of benefits, and it's enabling people to plan ahead. So maybe keep some money back to save for things like the huge climate events we're seeing that are affecting
Mhm.
people more and more in the communities we work with, so that they're able to have some money available to deal with those when they happen.
You set this up as an alternative to carbon offsets. Talk about the principles that you applied to the decision about where to deploy the resources you have. What are the criteria for, oh, this is a good fit for our program?
It's working with people that have management over their land, so they do need to have some sort of rights over their land, and rainforests that would be at threat if they didn't have support. Yeah, there's that. There isn't much to it in terms of the criteria. We need to be able to work directly with the Indigenous communities, and so have a really good opportunity to communicate and spend time with them, listen to their needs. So having Indigenous associations that work with them is a really great way of us doing that, through partnering with them. Yeah, I think that it's pretty. There's not too much complexity in working out where to work. Well, we've chosen actually to work in the Peruvian
Mhm.
Amazon and Papua New Guinea, which are the huge areas of forest that's still standing. So that's really important.
Pretty easy to see those things.
Yeah.
Let's imagine I'm an Indigenous leader and somebody comes to me from a tree planting program and says, we'll create jobs. In fact, I've been involved in planting a couple of million trees when I was working with Samsung, and it's attractive apparently to people. I can understand why. How do you pitch the alternative, which is we'd just like to give you money and solve some problems for you?
Yeah, yeah. I completely see tree planting, it's not necessarily a bad thing, and it's so
Sure.
incredibly valuable to be reforesting areas. But the rainforest that's already standing is much more important to keep it standing. It's
Mm-hmm.
full of biodiversity, and it's already got that carbon in it. And it's providing huge ecosystem services in terms of water cycle, climate regulation, and reducing flooding, things like that. But the problem with tree planting is it takes 30 years or more for a lot of the carbon to be absorbed, for the tree to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no guarantee that the tree will survive. So it means that selling it as a carbon offset is flawed in terms of you can't guarantee its permanence.
Well, I understand that aspect. I'm thinking more about the perspective of the indigenous leader.
Oh, right.
You show up and you say, "Here's some money," and they say, "You're giving me money. What do you expect in return?" In so many words. I mean, how
Oh,
did they
okay.
think
Yeah, yeah.
about it?
Yeah. So we don't actually expect anything in return in terms of our
Okay.
model. So it's putting trust in Indigenous people, and we have that trust because we've seen, I mean, across the 17 years that Cool Earth's been working, we've seen that this works. The rainforest has remained standing. We've had very little deforestation compared to similar areas that we're not partnering with. And we also see it in the literature as well, that when communities have got control of the land, that's where the biodiversity and the rainforest is staying standing. That's really the idea, is that you just provide funds for people to be able to stay living on the land, and don't there's no conditions attached to it, so they get to spend it how they want. So I think that's a really, in terms of comparing to tree planting, then they don't have to go out and plant trees. They just get to continue to live their lives and manage their land as they wish. Yes, I think that's the main benefit.
So let's talk about the other side of the equation. There's the funders who are going to provide the amount of money that these communities are going to get. How do you pitch the value of doing that to those funders?
The value is not only are you helping Indigenous people protect their land and the carbon within it, you're also really helping those people continue to live their lives. So it's a humanitarian benefit as well. And so it's just got so many pros. You're keeping carbon locked in, you're keeping the biodiversity there, all the ecosystem services that come with it, and you're helping the Indigenous people and the cultures and the values that they have continue to live there for generations more. So it's just the multiple benefits that you get from that investment.
Well, one of the things that struck me about this is that you are trusting people to make good decisions, and that's a beautiful alternative to this sort of interventionist, well, do it our way approach that many organizations take with especially low and middle income communities. They come in with a set of prescriptions for activity. You're literally letting these indigenous communities make their best decisions. How does the dialogue with the leadership go? Do they tell you what they're going to do? Do they ask your advice?
Yeah, so it's having that really good communication from the start. So we explain what we want from the project, which is keeping the rainforest standing, but also working with them, being flexible in terms of how they want to spend their resources. So we don't actually always just give funds. We do provide some support on the
Mhm.
side. It depends what those Indigenous people want. So yeah, it's having really good communication and being flexible, adapting when things change. Oh yeah, I think that's the main things.
Uh, so I think this is a really interesting point. This idea that we can allow people around the world to live better lives, preserving the lungs of the planet in this case. Do they understand their potential impact on the rest of the world when you talk about these ideas? I've spoken with a lot of people who have been in the rainforest and talk about satellite imaging, for instance, and the people on the ground are going, "What are you talking about? How can you see through the trees?" It must be a strange conversation for them too.
Yeah, so we've actually started providing data directly to the rainforest. So we've managed to create these what we call rainforest labs, where we've provided internet connection and laptops, so that our Indigenous partners have access to satellite data if they want it. So that's been an exciting new initiative that we've been doing over the last couple of years. And then from visiting these communities myself over the last 10 years or so, it's been interesting to see, well, there's different generational differences in generations in terms of awareness of what's going on. And we've seen mobile phones being used so much more. So people are now getting access to Facebook and the internet, so they are aware of climate change and the impact it's having globally. But I'd say, yeah, there's a generational difference. So I'd say the younger generation are a bit more aware maybe than some of the others.
Do they suffer from the same kind of youth flight that a rural community in the rest of the world is concerned about?
Yeah, absolutely. So losing the youth to local towns and jobs there. But I mean, I have seen in, for example, a community in Peru that we work closely where the younger generation have gone back and then found out they actually didn't like it in the city and have come back to the village and continue their lives there. So that's really interesting to see when that happens, actually the wanting to be near your family and where you've grown up, and the cultural ties has ended up being very important to them.
How many projects have you got active at this point, and how much money do you deploy on an annual basis?
Oh gosh, you're testing me now. I've forgotten the exact number of partnerships we have. I think it's something like 15 or so partnerships across Peru and Papua New Guinea, and
Mhm.
we have an income of about £4 million. I'm not quite sure what that is in dollars, and we've actually recently been doing some cost effectiveness evaluation work and realized that 95 cents in the dollar ends up going directly to our community. So we're really, really proud of how cost effective that is. It's actually getting directly into the hands of people on the ground.
That's a better than the best suggested performance here in the States. When I look at the deployment of philanthropic capital, generally 8% is roughly the minimum that people are taking out before they can pass the money on. This is a really interesting conversation. I need to take a quick commercial break, and we're going to be right back. Now let's return to the conversation with Hannah Peck. She is Deputy Director and Policy Lead at Cool Earth, which works with Indigenous leaders to develop rainforest protection strategies. Hannah, what kinds of practices are you finding are most effective in the rainforest communities that you are working with? Can you share what you've learned so that we can begin to apply some of these ideas at home?
Yeah, I can only speak from what I've witnessed when I've visited. I've had the privilege of visiting the rainforest communities in Peru and Papua New Guinea and a few other areas around the world. And the key practices are the knowledge of when to use the plants and the animals in the forest, and only taking what is needed at the time. And things like slash and burn techniques of clearing only small plots of land to grow crops and allowing them to grow back. Traditional material uses for building homes and other structures that work well in the landscape
Mhm.
with minimal damage. Um, and working together as a community to deal with extreme events such as forest fires. And we've been supporting a brilliant forest fires initiative in Peru that's been running with Indigenous federation called CARE, using their knowledge of the forest and the climate and the traditional ways of tackling fires to work with hundreds of villages across their area of the Peruvian Amazon to prevent forest fires taking hold, and they provide some training. So yeah, it's that community working together and the really great traditional knowledge of the plants and the animals.
So a couple of different dimensions of that. Let me dig into the first one, that last thing you said, that relationship with the plants and the animals. How do you understand the difference between an indigenous relationship with nature and the way that we do things in the West? What have you learned from that?
I think it's understanding the your place within that landscape, and that nature is in control, and you can benefit from it, but not take advantage of it, and have respect for it. So not over harvesting and taking just what you need at the time, and working with the seasons as well. When you're living in the rainforest, you're so aware of the changes happening. I mean, this is all very well me saying this because but that's from what I've perceived when I'm there.
And the other is you talked about fire prevention. In the rainforest, how are they using, for instance, prescribed burns in order to prevent the fuel load from building up to a point where it would be uncontainable if it were to ignite?
I actually don't know too many of the details of how they're managing it. I haven't been to those projects and seen them in action. But yeah, making sure that areas that are really going to be lit up quickly are burnt in before that happens. And also, I think they're really relying on quick alert systems. So using local weather forecasting. They've got radio systems going on, so there's a lot of modern technology coming in as well as the traditional use, which is great. Mix of the two.
How do you see those communities changing with the introduction of technology?
Well, it has been fascinating in just the 10 years that I've seen how much has changed, and now obviously we're helping introduce internet access as well, and it seems to be a really positive thing, bringing the traditional knowledge and the technology together, and we're seeing that now with our new initiative with the Rainforest Labs, that our community members are choosing to go out and monitor and note down what species they've got in the forest, and so yeah, being able to record that traditional knowledge, but using technology to do it.
So what role do metrics and the accountability that you can create using metrics play in Cool Earth's approach? Did you report back to the funders and so forth about the impact that they're having in a quantified way?
We do. We use both quantitative and qualitative data. So we monitor things that you would expect us to monitor.
Mhm.
So things like how the money's spent. So we don't ask we don't insist on the communities telling us exactly how they're spending their money, but actually they've it's been great that we've been able to do that in a voluntary way and collect that information. So we've got details on exactly how some of it's spent, and then what impact that has to people's lives. And then um, we've also used satellite technologies, as you expect, to monitor the change in the forest. So that's deforestation, but also regrowth as well, which is
Mhm.
really important to monitor. And something which is really important to us, is to make sure that that data is owned by the community, not by us. So we make sure that that information goes back to them as well. So we're thinking about not just our funders, but the community as well.
That's fascinating. So they're becoming familiar with the physical impact that they're having through data rather than being just hearing stories about it, for lack of a better way of putting it. One of the things we talked about a little earlier is the role of the indigenous leader, but as the technology comes in, you mentioned colonization earlier, is the technology itself potentially a form of appropriation of their culture or a displacement of their culture? I'm just curious if that's something that you all have run into as a concern.
Oh, it's a really good point. I haven't really thought about it.
I'll give you an example. I've been doing some work on digital public infrastructure in the global south, and one of the things that we found when we were talking with people on the ground was, don't show up and give me a Western solution.
Yeah.
Give me something that I can make my own. Do you find them thinking about that when they use the technology you're providing?
I need to speak to my Peruvian and Papua New Guinea colleagues to see what they think. It'll be really interesting to ask them. So I will do that soon to hear. But I think, as I said, we've seen so much more use of technology by Indigenous communities anyway. It's coming into all of their villages, apart from the really remote, uncontacted villages. So I haven't really thought about it I haven't come across situations where we've been accused of appropriating, and um
You would know. I'm sure you would know.
yeah, I hope so. I hope we would get that feedback. Yeah.
Let's go back to the comparison between the offset programs people are hearing about all the time and what you're doing. How does your direct investment change the CO2 emissions? Let's just index on carbon for a moment in the regions that you're addressing? Have you done that kind of quantitative analysis to compare tree planting programs with the resilience that you're enabling with the direct payments?
So do you mean how much carbon we're managing to keep in the rainforest compared to
Yeah,
like
yeah.
tree?
Do you have a sense of the carbon footprint of the two different alternatives?
So as I said, it's very difficult to actually measure
Mhm.
carbon, particularly in these massive rainforest, intact rainforests, because you've got it in the roots of the whole
Sure.
canopy. But using satellite technology is a really great way of doing that. So we've got an estimate of how much is in our partnerships by
Hmm.
looking at that data, and then just in terms of comparing it to say tree planting, as I explained earlier, that there are the problems with trees not lasting, not
Sure.
surviving, and the issues with monocultures and not having that biodiversity and the resilience,
Mhm.
and particularly with climate change increasing forest fires and drought and making them it difficult for tree planting to survive. So yeah, I haven't got data off the top of I wouldn't know how those carbon storage and density compares, but we're really sorry, really what's the word? We know that intact rainforest is full of carbon
Sure.
and resilient.
Going all the way back to the beginning of the conversation again, we talked about the fact that it's too late for offsets. But as you think about where we are headed as a species on a planet that is challenged, can we turn this around? And how do you see our knitting together the truly global human community as a way of doing that?
Yeah, I'm really hopeful that we can turn it around. And I think working with Indigenous communities around the world who hold so much of the biodiversity and the land around the world, that we can make a real change. So it's just convincing governments and businesses, all just everybody, to support Indigenous people to be able to keep living on their land. And I think that's what gives me hope. If yeah, if attitudes can change and we can give more rights to Indigenous and local communities, make sure that they're being included in policy change and policy decision making, and
Mhm.
getting resources, funding, so they can actually make it to these events, because there's a lack of access. Convincing governments and everyone to provide funds directly to those people.
If you think out 5 or 10 or 15 years, how do you imagine these communities? What will they look like? Will the forest be denser, more biodiverse? What's your vision? What's Cool Earth aiming at as an outcome?
I think what we're Cool Earth's aiming for is not to have to exist. So we
Good.
would we would love it if everybody adopts this model of supporting Indigenous people, giving them unconditional resources. I mean, we should really be doing it as reparations in terms of the injustice that people have suffered. But yeah, in 5 to 10 years, if every Indigenous community was funded, then we'd see the rainforest still standing and rainforest recovering as well.
It doesn't sound as though there's a great deal of money needed to make a big difference in one of these communities. In terms of the efficacy or the return on investment of a dollar spent with the Cool Earth program, how do you see the difference compared to a carbon offset strategy?
Absolutely. It is really cost effective. There is you have to keep supporting communities, so it's not a short term. A lot of offset projects or conservation projects will go in for a few years and then
Yeah.
leave. That's not our point. So you need to keep giving this funding. We're not expecting communities to be able to create livelihood projects which suddenly are creating masses of profit and they don't
Mhm.
need us anymore. I mean, that would be great, but it just doesn't happen in reality. But it is so cost effective that it really makes sense to just keep providing those funds long term. So that's what it relies on. Yeah, and so in terms of comparing it to the cost of offset projects, it makes so much more sense, and it means that other funds can be spent on the climate mitigation that needs to be happened locally here in the UK and here in the US to stop all the carbon emissions happening elsewhere.
So if folks wanted to get involved and support the program, how can they do it?
Well, if they specifically want to support Cool Earth, it's just going onto our website and pressing the button to send funds over. It's as easy as that.
Great. Well, I hope that they do that. Hannah, thank you very much for your time today. It's been fascinating.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really interesting answering all your questions.
Well, please come back and keep us up to date on what's going on.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks for sticking around through the commercial. You've been listening to my conversation with Hannah Peck, Cool Earth's Deputy Director and Policy Lead, about the nonprofit's work with indigenous communities in rainforests in Peru and Papua New Guinea. With only about 4 million pounds sterling, or about $5.3 million a year, Cool Earth helps keep people in the places they know, love, and care for, instead of clear cutting or leaving that for a city to earn a living. And you can learn more about Cool Earth at coolearth.org. Cool Earth is all one word, no space, no dash. I was really impressed by Cool Earth's no conditions strategy, providing unrestricted funding. And that means that people can do with it what they need, not that they will receive an unlimited amount of funding. This unrestricted income provides the financial cushion that preserves the practices that can conserve rainforests, which are the keystone systems for the planet's air and water cycles, as well as the bedrock of planetary biodiversity. It's very easy to focus on carbon dioxide when we talk about forests and when we talk about climate change. Preserving the rainforest is not just about supporting indigenous communities, it's about supporting all of us and our health and our well being. By offering support and giving people the opportunity to choose, we enable wise choices rather than forced decisions that too easily can become short term, financially driven, and extractive. Trusting people, it turns out, can reinvigorate societies and the ecosystems they depend on. And a key point that Hannah made is that indigenous communities take only what they need from the environment. And that is something that is going to continue to change, that definition of what they need and the opportunities that come with extraction of materials from the rainforest. For example, as science discovers more natural compounds in the rainforest that we can use in medicines and foods and otherwise, the next challenge will be to assist those indigenous peoples to conduct sustainable harvests of those materials that we can use to eat, to create medicines, and much more. Keeping the choice about whether to harvest in their hands allows them to recognize and resist extraction when it becomes a net negative for the environment, for their environment and for ours. Indigenous communities are on the front line of the climate crisis, and Cool Earth keeps the power to decide the fate of rainforests in their hands, where it belongs. If we all learn to recognize and respond to climate change in our own regions, perhaps the world can unite, even a little bit more than today, to reverse the damage caused by industrial economies. We're going to keep an eye on Cool Earth and on all of these programs. Stay tuned. And I hope that you'll take a moment to look at any of the more than 500 episodes of Sustainability in Your Ear that we have and share them with your community. Writing a review on your favorite podcast platform will help your neighbors find us. Folks, you're the amplifiers that can spread more ideas to create less waste. So please tell your friends, your family, your coworkers, the people you meet on the street that they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or whatever purveyor of podcast goodness they prefer. Thank you very much for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Sustainability in Your Ear, and we will be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.